I had to go get some of my money that's out there. I can't let people bully me around.
Tonight, still fishing for a moderate livelihood. A Mi'kmaq harvester hits the water for lobster.
We recognize the rights of Indigenous communities to moderate livelihood fishing.
The Prime Minister responds to this week's violence and vandalism over Mi'kmaq lobster harvesting.
Access to Indigenous cultural people who have knowledge.
And a safe consumption site pops up after the most used safe injection site in Canada is shut down. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin tonight in southwest Nova Scotia, where Chief Mike Sack asked people to stay off the water. However, a Mi'kmaq lobster harvester went out on the waters anyways, accompanied by Mi'kmaq warriors. Angel Moore is at the scene to tell us what happened today. Angel?
Thanks, Winnipeg. I'm here at Sauniaville Wharf, where Sabanagadi lobster harvesters are still fishing a moderate livelihood, despite a week of violence from commercial non-Mi'kmaq fishermen, who fear the lobster stocks are too low. But Shai Francis, also known as Awesome, took a risk in order to haul in her traps.
I had to go get some of my money that's out there. I can't let people bully me around and think that I'm just going to stop because they want me to stop.
Fearing for her safety, Mi'kmaq warriors went on her boat. They say they're here to keep the peace on and off the water.
For security. There's nobody else here to protect me. That's my protection. They're my peacekeepers. They keep us safe whenever nobody else is here to help us.
More people are in support of the Sabanagadi moderate livelihood fishery, including the Society of the New Brunswick Acadians. They released a statement denouncing the violence and urged the Acadians of this region to stop. So far, it's been quiet on the water and on the wharf. Back to you, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Angel. $5 a pound. That's all it costs to buy lobster in downtown Halifax today. The sale happened in front of Nova Scotia's provincial legislature. Cheryl Maloney, seen here selling the lobster, organized the event called the Treaty Lobster Sale. It was in support of lobster harvesters in southwest Nova Scotia. However, Chief Mike Sack said his council did not support this sale, saying it could reverse the efforts to negotiate a moderate livelihood for harvesters. Prime Minister Trudeau again attended today's COVID briefing from Ottawa, where he was asked about the government's response to the violence towards Mi'kmaq fishermen in Nova Scotia. Specifically, he was asked about comments made by Chief Mike Sack of Sabanagadi Mi'kmaq Nation yesterday. During a press conference, he accused non-Mi'kmaq fishers of taking the law into their own hands and calling for the Prime Minister to get involved because he said the RCMP are not.
We are expecting the RCMP and police services to do their jobs and keep people safe. I think there's been some concern that hasn't been done well enough, and that's certainly something we will be looking at very closely. But we recognize the rights of Indigenous communities to moderate livelihood fishing, and we will ensure that we're moving forward in a way that recognizes these rights that have long existed and need now to be put into place.
There was an emergency meeting held today to talk about systemic racism in Canada's healthcare system. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller called for the virtual meeting in the wake of the tragic death of Joyce Echawan at a hospital in Quebec. Attending were Indigenous leaders and Indigenous healthcare professionals who shared their experiences with federal cabinet ministers. During the press conference afterward, Miller talked about speaking to Quebec's newly appointed Indigenous Affairs Minister.
Did have the occasion to speak to Minister Lafreniere right after our meeting today, who was on the call, and despite our differences, he wants to take some action, and I will hold him to that, and he will hold me to that.
Joyce Echawan recorded something that many Indigenous people are experiencing right now at this moment all across the country. It was not an isolated incident. It is not a few bad apples. It is a system that not just turns a blind eye, but implicitly endorses and reinforces this behavior many times over.
A First Nations woman in Manitoba is sharing the disturbing experience she had in a Winnipeg hospital last month. Sadie North's daughter, Sheila North, a former Grand Chief, says a staff member yelled at her mother when she could barely walk, and one doctor repeatedly probed her about alcohol consumption.
And that was the wrong way to say it. That's not a right way. I don't use alcohol. He said, "Are you sure?" Said, "When you're diabetic and alcohol doesn't mix together." And on. He didn't even look at my infection on my leg.
North questions why it was assumed that she had a problem with alcohol. Well, we want to hear whether you've experienced problems with the healthcare system. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Leave a comment on aptnnews.ca, or you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Share your comments. The first First Nations COVID-19 related death has been announced in Manitoba by the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. The individual was over 70 years in age, but no other information is being released. There have been 105 new First Nations cases of COVID-19 in Manitoba since last Friday. In the province, there are a total of 243 active cases amongst First Nations. 85 of those cases are on reserve, while 158 are off reserve. AMC Grand Chief Arlen Dumas says people need to pay attention and protect each other.
We've experienced our first loss because of COVID, and that's we knew that it's a matter of time, and but it's among us, right? It's happening. I think that it's hitting all of our communities, and we really need to be focused on it.
After 6 months of no COVID-19 cases, there are now 3 presumptive positives in the Northwest Territories. One is from Inuvik and the other 2 are from Yellowknife from the same household. The territorial government says no one has been hospitalized. However, today the first exposure risk advisory was issued. Anyone who spent time at the Anytime Fitness Gym or RCMP detachment waiting area from October 12th and 13th must isolate. As for community spread, the government says there's little additional risk.
The presumptive test we received in Inuvik has been thoroughly investigated. There is no exposure risk to any communities along the route traveled. These 3 presumptive tests have been sent to our partner public health lab in Alberta for confirmation. This is required because the new devices, which have decreased our turnaround times, have been validated for negative tests, but have not been validated for positive tests. This is simply because there have not been many positive tests in Northwest Territories.
Fanny Lafontaine is an independent civilian observer in Quebec. She took a critical look at how police forces handle allegations of assault or abuse by officers made by Indigenous people. Her report makes 25 recommendations as to how the province's police watchdog, the BEI, can improve itself. The BEI is called to investigate when a civilian is injured or killed during a police intervention. But before it was created, Montreal police invested all allegations of assault or abuse by Quebec police officers. The report concluded the investigations themselves were conducted respectfully and impartially, but Lafontaine found serious issues with transparency and communication with victims.
The SPVM's investigations were impartial, etc., so there's due process. Well, great. It doesn't negate systemic racism in policing with Indigenous communities across the country. But what it does say, though, is that the importance, it sort of highlights the importance of that very process of criminal investigations into Indigenous complaints against police officers. What's at stake here is police conduct that may or may not be motivated by racism individually, but that is sort of the result of a system of racism within police forces.
Time for a quick break, but first a look at what we have coming up.
Overdoses and an opioid crisis. Harm reduction supporters in Lethbridge face backlash from their own community.
It's just one thing after another, and we don't feel like we're getting the help we need.
That story's coming up on APTN National News.
Welcome back. The most used safe injection site in Canada has been shut down due to a misuse of finances. Harm reduction advocates set up a pop-up site in its place, but it's causing tension in the community. Tamara Pimentel has this story out of Lethbridge, Alberta.
A resident confronts volunteers at this supervised consumption tent. Volunteers say there have been other incidents from Lethbridge residents, a city with a high Indigenous homeless population. The site was set up for media availability when the presser was interrupted.
This is my kid's bus stop.
For these harm reduction workers and supporters, it's been a fight to help those struggling with addictions. The pop-up site began operations in September after a government-funded site closed its doors due to misuse of funding. Over $1 million was unaccounted for. The thing is, this site was the most used supervised consumption site in Canada. It saw about 500 visits a day before it was shut down. A much smaller mobile site was set up in its place. But Dr. Susan Edelman, a physician for the nearby blood reserve, says more needs to be done.
It's just one thing after another, and we don't feel like we're getting the help we need. If we had more reliable supervised consumption services, including maybe safe supply, a lot of these things wouldn't exist. A lot of these problems wouldn't exist because people who are reliant on one substance would be able to get that one substance.
Indigenous resident Martin Heavyhead says people on the streets need the extra supports that came with the original consumption site.
There was access to counselors, there was access to Indigenous cultural people who have knowledge. There was a clinic there. There were a lot more services that were available to the people on the street with very, very limited barriers.
In a statement to media, the provincial government said the tent is operating illegally and is in contravention of the criminal code in Canada. Therefore, it's been monitored heavily by police.
To see the crisis in Lethbridge.
Volunteer Tim Slaney says he is questioned by police and members of the public as to why it's still operating.
Our questions are honestly outweighed by the questions that we get from our participants. Those are questions like, do you have any naloxone kits? Can you help us find clean needles because there's none left in town? Can you please help us get medical attention for this wound that is now badly infected because we aren't able to access clean supplies or a clean, safe place to use our drugs?
Despite the opposition, Slaney says the tent will be available to those that need it for as long as possible, because while disputes continue, there are still people on the streets that need help.
We still have a lot of work to do, and we can't go home until we're allowed to do that work.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Lethbridge.
Still to come, the federal government has provided funding for those looking to speak Michif.
We must be able to act quickly to put in place effective programs so that our fluent speaking elders can pass on their knowledge to the younger generation.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Our photo today is provided by Tammy Kelly. The colors of fall are highlighted in this photo of McBurney Park, located in Kingston, Ontario. Thanks, Tammy. Send us your photos. You can email your shot to @aptn.ca, and we'll do our best to get them on the air. Well, some of those leaves are going to be covered in snow. Here's a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. showers and 18 for Charlottetown and Halifax. 7 with rain in Nain, 16 for Cartwright. 12 in Montreal, 6 with showers in Chibougamau. 13 under sunny skies for Toronto and Ottawa, 7 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie. 3 with a rain-snow mix in Thunder Bay, snow and +1 in Sioux Lookout. Snow and +1 for Churchill and God's Lake, Norway House as well. +3 with snow for Winnipeg, +1 and flurries in Barons River. -3 with showers for Regina, sunny and 3 below for Saskatoon. -1 with snow in Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Over to northern Alberta, -3 and snow in Fort Chip, 4 below with snow for Fort McMurray. Snow and -2 in Medicine Hat, 4 below with rain in Edmonton. Partly cloudy and 12 for Vancouver and Victoria. -4 in Fort Nelson, showers and 0 in Dease Lake. -13 in Old Crow, 3 below with rain in Whitehorse. 2 below and snow in Yellowknife, -7 in Norman Wells. 8 below with snow for Sax Harbor, -3 in Pawlatuck. 3 below and snow for Baker Lake, -7 in snow in Cambridge Bay. -2 with snow in Resolute, 0 with snow in Arctic Bay. Michif language programs in Manitoba are getting a funding boost to the tune of $487,000. The federal government announced the news during a virtual press conference. The newly formed Two Sisters Language Resources and Applied Linguistics organization will receive a portion of the funding. They specialize in tracing the origins of Indigenous languages. The Louis Riel Institute and the Northwest Métis Council, both extensions of the Manitoba Métis Federation, will also receive funding.
The Métis Nation has identified a wide range of initiatives that need funding to address the urgency of ensuring transfer of language fluency to our children and grandchildren. Almost all of our fluent speakers are over the age of 65. We must be able to act quickly to put in place effective programs so that our fluent speaking elders can pass on their knowledge to the younger generation.
Melting sea ice. It's one of the most dramatic climate change images we see in the South. But as reporter Rob Smith discovered, it is threatening the Inuit way of life. Rob joins me now to talk about his APTN Investigates episode, Burning Down the House, Part 2. Rob, thanks for being with us. What did you find out about climate change in the Arctic?
Well, adaptation is happening now for the people in the Arctic. The changes to lifestyle, threats to a way of life is starting to happen now. Threats to personal safety even. We talked with some hunters who were going places where they expected it to be safe. Frozen ice, it's always been frozen at that time of year. Almost go through the ice with their skidoos. But migration of animals where the animals usually are now starting to be further and further away. All as things get more and more expensive in terms of bringing oil up and whatnot. So they're having to definitely adapt to climate change. As we speak, again, an ancient lifestyle threatened, and it's happening right now.
Rob, how does this relate to oil industry lobbyists?
Well, there was an expression of frustration from some of the people up there that they're having to deal with firsthand with the folly of what's happening down here in the south. One of the and we've kind of through the two-parter we've kind of gone through some of the different ways we have been denying climate change is happening. And one of the capital deniers has been the oil industry. And we talked with a former politician turned author in Alberta who laid it out for us that how influential the oil lobby was in creating that sense of it's no problem here, and we're able to get their way of looking at the world into law in Canada. And that power was something the author suggested was a threat to democracy, and one of the main reasons that blocked any movement on climate change.
Of all the experts you spoke with, are any of them hopeful at all?
Hopeful is a relative term. I think most of the experts we talked to understand that we're in it now. Adaptation is something we're going to have to just get used to. The most hopeful was Greg Flato, a senior researcher with the Government of Canada, also an author of the IPCC reports, one of the authors of the IPCC reports that the UN put out occasionally, kind of here's what's happening around the globe reports. He was the author of one of them. He has a sense that things are finally starting to click into place, that there is a movement afoot around the world. He is, I guess, the voice of hope, but he understands that at this point, for that to happen, for us to avoid some of the worst catastrophic things that are predicted, we'd have to basically get in an emergency mode right now, akin to what we saw with what's happened to society through the COVID-19 shutdown. So unless we start working to change ways that drastically, the UN kind of suggests we're going to hit that 3 degrees above pre-industrialized industrial revolution levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's really no good for us.
Well, Rob, looking forward to part 2. Appreciate you chatting with us here about it.
Thanks, Dennis.
And you can watch the entire episode of Burning Down the House Part 2 tonight on APTN Investigates right after the news. And you can catch Part 1 on our website. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and download the APTN News app. And don't forget to join us tomorrow for APTN National News Weekend. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.